another Madaxeman Army List special podcast. This week I'm yet again joined by Richard and by Dave as we dive into list number 125, the Justinian Byzantines. It's kind of the tail end of the Roman Empire, it's kind of the beginning of the Byzantines, and it's some of Byzantium's greatest generals and some of their greatest victories. But yet again, it's a list that sometimes flatters to deceive. We're going to try and find some gems in the list, so sit back and enjoy the podcast.
This means war.
Okay, then, well, welcome to another list podcast. I'm joined again by Richard and Dave, and this week in our tour around some of the, I guess, the popular but less loved, if that's not a contradiction in terms, lists. We're into the Justinian Byzantines, the very first Byzantine list, the one that's at the start of that sort of Dark Ages section of the book. And this is an area that I think Dave in particular is kind of your bit of history as well. Just as a bit of context, Justinian, he's kind of it sort of feels like he's halfway between the last of the Romans and the first of the Byzantines, but he presided over a pretty sort of kick-ass pseudo-expansion of that Byzantine Empire. They reconquered a lot of things. They were in Spain, they were in North Africa, they were in Italy. They had a pop at the Sassanids as well. And he did quite a lot of stuff at home. I think this is the guy who kind of built the Hagia Sophia as well. And fascinating period for what currently is a pretty thin list with some pretty standard troop types. But I don't know, Dave, do you, maybe for starters, do you feel that given all those different theatres that they operated and how successful they were, that this list as it currently stands really nails what this army's about, given the successes it had?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty reflective of it. Essentially, this period is a continuation of it's the Roman Empire after Rome has fallen. So it's the Roman Empire continuing out of Constantinople. So it's got a very the army list, and it's got a flavour of being Roman army getting rubbish in the infantry, but the cavalry force becoming much more important, and reflecting the peoples and its opponents around it. As we said in previous ones about Romans, the Romans were very good at adapting to who they were fighting. So in essence, I love this period because this is what I studied at university off the back of reading Count Belisarius by Robert Graves. And that, when I discovered that the Byzantines even existed, reading that got me fascinated that's when I began wargaming. So I've always been fascinated by this army, and it's always been a fascinating army for people in wargaming terms. I think you've almost got three periods. You've got the early Justinian period where they're fighting the Persians. Then you've got a period where they're fighting in North Africa. And then you've got another period where they're trying to retake Italy. I think in historical terms, the world has been ravaged by plague. The populations have deteriorated. The Romans are a shadow of their former selves, but Justinian's trying to re-establish the Roman Empire.
And is that shift away from infantry? Because in some ways, if you look at this as a continuation of the patrician Roman list, the patrician Roman list has like loads of interesting toys, and this one, it's got the brilliant double armed impact and bow bucellariae cavalry, but it is that shift towards high quality cavalry actually driven by their opponents? Is it driven by demographics? There's just not enough infantry? Is it driven by they had to cover big borders? Of those three things, what's your leaning?
So the patrician period is a period where the Roman army's disappearing as the main provider of troops, and it's the main troops in the army are what they call foederati, who are allies. So you've got Gothic cavalry, Gothic infantry becoming the mainstay of the Roman army. Even what would maybe Roman legionaries are actually Goths fighting in Roman formations. So we're very close on the heels of that. And what's happened is those troops have now been amalgamated into the Byzantine Roman army. So their heavy cavalry is a combination of Gothic cavalrymen, a lot of whom they refer to as Thracian. So a lot of their recruiting grounds are Thrace and North Africa, and including in Persia. So Belisarius's bodyguard, the Bucellaria, who are the biscuit eaters, funnily enough.
Okay, that's a whole other story. Yeah.
The general is allowed to have a bodyguard he recruits of himself, and those are called the Bucellarii. And those are more often a mixture of Persians and Thracian heavy cavalry who are fighting in the Roman manner. So they're like basically allied mercenaries that have been incorporated into the Byzantine Roman army and are fighting in the Roman manner. And you've got other cavalry who aren't quite as good as those bodyguards, who are called the cavallarioi, etc., etc. But the infantry...
from a war gamer's point of view, do where are those people being brought in? Would you say that means picking your Essex figure and they're all the same pose and they all look like Byzantines? Is your gut feel that there's scope to be a bit more left field and varied in the uniform, or were they, you come and work for us and here's the uniform, put this on, here's the name badge, 5 stars if you stay 3 campaigns, a bit like McDonald's on horseback?
I think it's a bit different between the two troop types. So the cavallarioi are basically the descendants of, they are true Roman citizens in the main, whereas the bodyguards, the bucellarioi, they are the hodgepodge. So you see them in different guises all over the sort of former Roman Empire. So there'll be a mix of Huns and Persians and Goths and Heralds, probably very few native sort of Byzantine troops in there, with a high degree of personal loyalty to the general. So you've almost got, just as you had in the West, this sort of descent into sort of early feudalism. That's a bit what these bodyguards represent. And they're also a bit the breakdown of the authority of the emperor. So, you've got that stress between these great magnates and generals with their own bodyguard and the regular army, which is okay, but it's heavy cavalry bow and heavy swordsmen. Neither of them have impact. Neither of them have the aggression. The aggression is coming from people, foreigners, who have entered Roman service.
But I'm thinking from a figure and painting selection point of view.
So from a figure painting, the Bucellarii, I think a lot of them would have retained their native dress. A lot of them would have picked up some Roman. So you can really have those units be very colourful, I think, very flamboyant, and the rest of it a little more sort of dulled down and bland.
Now, I'm wondering, if you were...
figures and what type of figures to use for the army. I mean, it's an army which I've always wanted to do and never felt the figures have been quite there. And I think some figure manufacturers come up with them now. But I agree. I think, Persian helmets with Greek, with Byzantine Roman helmets, a real mixture would be good.
No, just thinking about that, maybe, this is kind of list speculation, but from the way you're describing those as a series of bodyguards, different ethnic groups tied to generals, that this list with 1 to 4 or up to 4 of these high quality double armed cavalry, in some ways it sounds like you could almost do with a caveat of it's 1 to 4, but you're only allowed 2 in any one command. But then again, I suppose these armies sometimes scaled up. Sometimes you're representing a tiny force. Sometimes you're representing a much bigger force. So the idea of having 4 of them is a quarter of the army or 20% of the army. Perhaps it just works. Maybe it's just a variable scale thing. But if you were doing a historical battle, you might have had 2 different.
That's a difficult one because you'd have a real range of armies. There were times when Belisarius went into Thrace and into Romania with just his bodyguard, and things like that. Then you had much larger pitched battles. So,
Okay. All right. And then just a kind of quick cant around the infantry. So all of the Goths and the rest of it fighting in Gothic style, they've kind of petered out, and they've all just been given uniforms, and they are, Byzantine bog standard infantry who've lost a bit of the magic. And was that because there just weren't scary barbarians to bring in from elsewhere, or did they fight in sort of smaller blocks? I think there is the option for the dismounted heralds, isn't there, in one of these lists or something?
I think the dismounted heralds are specific to Italy and Nazis, right, and some of the periods like that. I think in reality, in the early period in Persia, you should have a lot more infantry in reality, and light infantry. But it's a Byzantine army in war games terms. It's
cavalry first. You're going to not choose them, and I suppose there's quite a few javelin men and another thing once you get down to the bottom of the list.
You can take the ally with all the impetuous heavy foot, and that sort of represents it. I think where you're hiring a whole tribe, you still get that kind of impetuous foot, but where you're representing individual units that have maybe been in Roman service now, maybe for a generation, they've been taken the company rations too long, and they have lost a bit of that zest.
Okay, so maybe then maybe putting it a different way, then this is one of the lists where the concept of an allied contingent actually represents not, hello, let's form a political alliance and go over there and kick someone's, whatever. Some of this represents a decent sized contingent of mercenary troops all fighting together with a slightly less, reliable general within the context of the allies represent the same way that the Foederate foot representing the patrician Roman, but just with a slightly different command structure sat on top of it, arguably.
Yeah.
Yes, or people who are almost like a client kingdom, where again they're being incentivized to fight for you rather than the Sassanids or the Bulgars.
Okay, all right. So it's just a different way of looking at the concept of ally. Then fine. All right. Well, look, that's an interesting canter through some of the history. Let's crack on with the lists.
This means war.
Well, on with the list as we go, and we'll start, Dave, with one of yours. And I think me and you, we've all chucked in a list here, and I think between the two of us, we've come up with a couple of the more obvious ways of doing this, and Richard's come up with a couple more left field ones. So let's start with you. You've got Belisarius, the legendary general, running it as a strategist, but you've got a 20, which is that sort of textbook Byzantine. I wish it could be a little bit bigger, but 20 is better than 19. Number there. You've got an initiative of 4, which is pretty stellar. But just talk us through your commands of 11, 6, and 3. So clearly the 11 is going to do all the heavy lifting, but just run us through the troops in line by line in that first corps under Belisarius, the strategist.
So I've tried to make this relatively accurate as a Byzantine army. So I've given the general. So the first command is Belisarius himself. He's a strategist. The idea of this army is it's going to be lots of cavalry racing around in individual penny packets, trying to make a tough work for the enemy. So I've gone for a lot of commands. I've got strategist in the first command. I've got a brilliant general in the second, and then the third command is also. So command 3 is the one which goes down first. He's got a really top draw heavy cavalry general. Now, the idea of that command is only 3 in that command with an ordinary general included. So that command can either be put down first in the middle of the table to see where, I'm going to win the initiative. I'm going to be able to get a good look at my opponent's army. If I put down that first command first, I'm going to get to see most of my opponent's army before I put down the bulk of my.
And those three, that's just one Bucalari with the general, one Cavallari, who's just heavy cavalry bow, and one light cavalry bow. It's your textbook tiny heavy cavalry command.
And I'm trying to work on the flexibility. So that command can either go in a flank, it can go in a ambush, it can go on a flank march, or it can go down first as a chance to see where the opponent's army is. Then the second command I would say to go down would be the brilliant commander, and he's got 2 heavy cavalry. He's got another general himself. Well, another general who's a heavy cavalry. Sorry, another heavy cavalry. Yeah, I've taken him out of being a brilliant. I didn't want to have a brilliant general included. Actually, I thought I had second
scary.
Yeah, especially with a break point of 20. Now, what I wanted to do with that command is actually represent something Belisarius did, and that's what Belisarius did in a lot of his battles. Would create a lot of ambushes. So I'm giving myself the ability to create a lot of ambushes here. Command 3 can be an ambush, but I'd actually like to try and put those Huns into an ambush, and because with a brilliant general, I can spread that command out and put it where I need to be. So it can.
Yeah, because that's got 3 light horse with your 3 heavy cavalry, and 3 light horse is actually starting to be a lot. But so you're seeing those operating, maybe the 2 elite Huns operating separately to the block of 3 heavy cavalry and the other light horse.
If I can get those Huns around the back of commands and things, they will charge into the rear of things on themselves, because they go in, get a 1 for being in the flank, 1 for being an overlap, and they're elite. So I want them to be. I want to use them as I say, Alex. I would take issue with the list and say that the Huns should be able to be medium cavalry elites, because I think they need to have a bit more impact. Belisarius used his Huns as impact troops quite often, and they were fighting troops rather than just skirmishing troops. But I want to use them. So again, they may. I've got a strategist. I can put down 3 ambushes. I can make my opponent sit there and go, Jesus, is he coming at me in ambush? Is he coming?
Yeah, that's a good. But that's one of those extra things about a strategist that's very easy to forget, isn't it? It gives you a third ambush marker too. Yep.
So you could actually sit there and go, right, core 3 is going down as a flank march, and I just, I put down my first command could maybe just be 3 heavy cavalry, and then I can put down the major count, the strategist. Now the strategist again, because he's a strategist, he's got the ability to split his commands up and use a lot of maneuverability. Something I'm not.
So yeah, so you're 11 there. Talk us through those, line by line, how you're going to put them down, how you're going to split them. Is that 3 groups? I'm guessing.
Yes, I would imagine so. Yeah, depending on. I think the first thing I'd put down in that command would be the infantry. I mean, to some degree, you've got scutatoi, which are heavy swordsmen in this period. Now, in order to sort of get the points to play somewhere else, I've made them mediocre. I'm just going to use them to protect my bowmen. I'm going to put them with the bowmen. What I want to do is get the bowmen into a situation where the bowmen are adding their shooting with the cavalry.
So you've got two normal bowmen, 2 mediocre heavy swordsmen as a block, and that's 4 wide. But you're really playing with the bowmen and using the scutatoi to help them.
Yeah, and I to be honest, I would imagine in this period they may end up going in a field, even with the heavy swordsmen, because swordsmen, they're a minus, but I want to protect them. I don't want to lose their points, but I want to try and use the bowmen to support my cavalry. So that's the first command. I mean, and also that's some infantry who can go chasing after a camp if it's at all possible. If somebody's got a fortified camp, you can't attack it with cavalry. That's their job. They've got 1 light infantry with them to protect.
Just to screen the swordsman, from shooting. Right. So then that leaves you with what? 2 bucalarii, 2 heavy cavalry, 1 medium cavalry, and a light horse bow. So you've got 5 cavalry and a light horse in that one.
Yeah. So the real for the army is going to be combining up the bucalarii heavy cavalry impact elite with the heavy cavalry bow. I want to come forward with them and try and get them to combine up with the other heavy cavalry impact when I can get that opportunity. If I'm going to have to do a fight, I want to concentrate my heavy cavalry together, particularly the impact ones. But the important thing with this army is it's a shooting army. You sit there and go, oh, an opportunity to charge there. You really want to sit there and soften up the enemy. The medium cavalry and the light horse I foresee working together just to go with and go herring off on their own. I'm hoping that strategist can give me plenty of pips. If need be, I'll leave the infantry behind, but I want to get all those cavalry pairing around together.
So really then you're driving 4 heavy cavalry together, you're driving a block of 4 infantry together who shoot, and then you're using a medium cavalry and the light horse bow as a little block of this stuff's better than your light horse on the flank. I guess
more or less something like that. I mean, I would probably be looking, hoping a bowman can get forward to start shooting in combination with that medium cavalry and the light cavalry. The medium cavalry's in there again to make points up. It's very hard to get 20 in this army.
Yeah.
And you can do it if you get a lot of medium cavalry bow, but medium cavalry bow are really, really weak, particularly to other people. If you're facing someone else who's got a lot of bowmen, you will get shredded. I've played with the Byzantine army in Bournemouth, and I took a lot of medium cavalry impact, and they won good on some games, but when they faced bowmen, they got shredded. So the medium cavalry is there just for cheapness and to get it up to 20.
So that question, you said you do want to soften these people up, and maybe this is kind of a general question as well. If you've got elite heavy cavalry impact bow, the temptation to charge them in because they're better than most things is always there. But you've then said it's a sort of shooting and skirmishing army. So would you expect to evade at all with those guys? Would you typically go, we're going to evade twice and come back before we go in, or does it work like that?
I think they're going to be evading. They're going to have to be evading, and they're going to be going. I can see them coming forward to pin things whilst other things slip past down the sides wherever possible. But at some point in the game, if we are getting to an actual fight, I want to be concentrating the Bucalari together with the heavy cavalry and trying to get what it would be. It'd be 2, 4, 5, 7, 9. I want to get those 9 heavy cavalry together in the upteenth points. But at the start of the game,
the risk of doing even one set of evading with 14-point elite heavy cavalry impact bow. There is a risk they get caught, isn't there? Even if it's
it's a horrible feeling doing that. What I try to do in that situation is put them in an angle.
Okay.
So that what they're doing is if they're evading away from the enemy at an angle, which gives them a bit of extra. You don't want to be sitting directly in front of the enemy and evading directly to your rear and him coming straight towards you. So you get that. If he rolls +1 and you roll -1, you get caught. If you can do it at an angle,
just gives you a little bit more.
Yeah, and if you can put something in front of him to pin him, and then come in and he's coming in at an angle, and that also means that you've got the possibility of getting someone to slip past again. This army is all about manoeuvre,
So Richard, you're looking at this one and stroking your beard. What's your thoughts on this as an army?
I agree with Dave. I think the way to play this is to split the Bucalarioi up, and rather than have one block of 4 of them, because that, you've got one point of major menace that your opponent will find it easier to deal with than if they're spread up. And I think, as Dave said, the tactic is to roll up, shoot to soften up the enemy, but by having the Bucalarioi there, when you do charge, once the enemy is weakened, you've got much more chance of cracking through. So I think that's right. I think the big challenge with this, it's a bit like a Mongol army. The big challenge is you end up with 19 or 20, and so if your opponent has shooting 2, then it becomes who's more fortunate in rallying.
So in some ways, then these guys were lucky they were fighting the Sassanids rather than the early Achaemenids, because all those whatever they were, Spara Bara, would have caused them all sorts of problems.
I think so, but as we've said, about the thing about Roman armies is they evolve to be the most effective thing against the opponents they're facing. So, they would have just gone back to heavy infantry if they had been facing Sparabara foot.
Yeah, you'd have the 9 Scutatoi and they would have just got better, wouldn't they? They would have been better trained.
They'd just given them some armour back and they'd have rocked up and thumped them.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, look, that's the first list covered off, and we'll crack on with the second.
This means war.
Look, Dave, you've done the textbook Belisarian Byzantine one, and this one here that we're looking at now is my version of it. Not the textbook one at all, but this is in that theme of evolving from the Roman Empire and the patrician Roman. This is a sort of evolution of that, of a way that I've taken patricians before, really looking at it and saying impetuous heavy cavalry and medium cavalry are pretty good and pokey. It gives you an interesting game, a decisive game where you can overwhelm the enemy if you're lucky and do it properly. And this is sort of a chance to do that with good initiative, because a lot of the Byzantine armies have the barbarian armies have quite poor command and control. So this is good command and control, but a kind of hairy Byzantine army. So looking through this, I've got to 22, possibly a record for Byzantine armies, and using a herald ally. But what this gives me, again, going for the strategist, because I think if you're playing with impetuous cavalry, you've got to own the terrain. You really, really do. So the strategist, your point about ambushes might be fun as well, but this is really to clear a big path out of the terrain. I've stuck in the fortified camp because it's not got a lot of things to anchor that, and I think that's a decent way of boosting the boosting the unit count. And this army is going to be front foot, but it's going to leave gaps behind it. So in the strategist command, this is really where I've dumped the Scutari toy. It's probably the best bet, and there's all sorts of different ways you can use it. I know, Dave, you put in 2 of the mediocre ones and 2 bowmen, but that's kind of taking the minimum. I was in 2 minds about whether just to go super minimum and leave them behind, or what I've actually done is slightly lent the other way and said, if I've got to have 2, I'm not convinced that mediocre swordsmen really work particularly well. So having 3 ordinary is just a bit of a bigger block that I feel can do something. But, it could occupy even a sort of 5 or 6 of enemy foot in some ways, or threaten their bowmen with that strategist. So you've got 3 Scutari with the strategist, but then you've got your very similar cavalry command to you. I've put 2 of the Bucalarii together, heavy cavalry impact bow elite. 1 heavy cavalry, 2 medium cavalry. I just feel a bit more comfortable playing with 2 mediums and 1 light horse bow. I think you're right, they are vulnerable, but with 3 heavy cavalry with them, I think there's still scope to use 2 mediums. That's getting you up to 5 wide plus 3 more for the Scutari. You've got 8, 9. It's a bit of a waste of the strategist because it is sort of a 2-group command, but then again, maybe that operate the 3 heavy cavalry together, the 2 mediums and the 1 light out on the flank to bully other people's lights completely and get round a bit quicker by forcing through that thing you were saying, similar to, I guess, to using the Huns as medium cavalry. The second command, competent general, included an unreliable, bit of a point saver, but this is probably the one that's just been thrown at someone. And 1 of the Bucalarii with the general, super punchy, 4 heavy cavalry impetuous, just get them in. A more light cavalry javelin, I think for this aggressive sort of command, it's a teeny tiny detail, but a light cavalry javelin is a bit better than a light cavalry bow. And another medium cavalry bow, because as you say, in this army, they qualify as cheap troops. And what they do is that's either an overlap or it's sitting behind that block of 5 charging cavalry and filling in gaps or doing what is. It's not really doing a great deal in its own right. So with these 2 already, I'm up to 5, 6, 7, 8 heavy cavalry, of which 7 of them can charge in, and the impetuous ones are there. And then it's kind of doubling down on it. And this is where I was slightly surprised that the numbers didn't quite work out as well as I hoped on this list. A herald ally, I've made him competent too, made him included as well. This is double down on getting into contact and getting good scores. So he's embedded in a heavy cavalry impetuous elite with the heralds. There's a heavy cavalry impetuous with them as well, and then 2 medium cavalry, because I think, again, once you're up to this many impetuous cavalry, having a couple of them medium, it's all about that extra +1 in the first rank. So, so this is a kind of win quick, lose quick, go to the bar version of it, where you're using the command and control to sweep the terrain away, get yourself going first, and overwhelm something by throwing double figures of impetuous cavalry at it before anything can happen. And your 3 scutatoi hopefully don't have too much to do, but if they can just soak up some punishment whilst your 22 strong army does it, it's in Byzantine terms it is big, but it's definitely not clever. And I think there's probably arguments that the strategist is a bit overkill, but you're using him for the terrain and the initiative, because you do get up to initiative 4 with it. But desperately simple and desperately one-dimensional.
I think it's really good. I think it's legitimate historically. I think you could say the heralds in Italy particularly were there. I'm guessing you're going to put down command 3, the herald ally in the centre, and just charge straight down the middle of the table with him, and use the other 2 to do the manoeuvring on the flanks. The only comment I'd have is I would worry about the medium cavalry being shot at, especially in this period. You might need more light troops to cover the medium cavalry from shooting, even the heavy cavalry from shooting.
Yeah, squeezing in maybe 1 or 2 more light cavalry, but I'm not, from what I remember, I'm not sure the heralds can actually have 1, but having just 1 in front to absorb the shooting,
yes,
is good. Although I think the problem I found with doing that in the past is you stick a light cavalry out the front to screen a couple of units or absorb the shooting. It then takes 2 hits in 2 turns, dies, and inflicts injuries on your cavalry anyway.
Yeah, I hate that.
So in some ways, it's just best to throw the damn things in.
Yeah,
I mean,
live with it.
I think it's a very interesting. It's a bit similar to a version of the Goths that I ran under Theodoric, and the only thing I think I like it as it is. I would think about making. I know you lose initiative, but if you had ordinary commanders and you put that medium cavalry bow with the strategist, but then deploy it behind one of the others. And ironically, what you could do is put the strategist in the middle, put the 2 ordinary charging generals on the flanks, and then the strategist can provide a medium cavalry second line to each of the charging generals. And it doesn't matter then that the charging generals are in combat, because the strategist is providing them with their second line supports.
Definitely.
Possibly, yeah, but I think maybe that's starting to give the strategist, anyway, quite a lot to do because of the distance. I know they've got a big distance, but if he's juggling 2 different things, and still then using those medium cavalry with the light cavalry in the same way that Dave did, to give you a pokey thing to take somebody else out on the flanks with their light horse. But this is simple
Depends on the
stuff.
terrain, yeah.
In terms of terrain, and then keeping the strategist and the initiative of 4 just gives you a lot more chance of making that terrain decision or owning that terrain decision. It's you are putting quite a lot on a +1 on 1 dice roll at the beginning of the game, which is always the gamble with this sort of thing. But as a way of creating a Gothic army with good command and control, or good enough command and control to steer your cavalry around, it works. In some ways, I might even think drop the units down to 21 and take some of those generals out, because they are a bit, then totally committed.
Okay.
And you might choose to move them up and down the line and decide which one they join in combat, rather than tying them into one of them. But I think partly if you give yourself too many opportunities to think with armies like this, you end up using them wrongly. There's some ways about being committed at deployment to a plan and then executing that plan. That's it.
I think if you can use heavy cavalry impetuous, including a general is not a bad thing, because it keeps you to what their mission is.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely have it with the heralds. I mean, I run a medieval Spanish army a lot, and I always have an included general with my knights, because I've got impetuous knights. Their job is to charge in and win.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if the general's out the back or not, and you're sitting there wondering, should I do this? Should I do that? You just got to get stuck in with them.
Yeah. Start rolling the dice, really.
Exactly. And if they blow up, they blow up.
Yeah, no, it's still, clearly it's got those same core components, but it's got quite a different play style to yours. You know, you're talking about evading. I'm not doing any of that at all, really.
One argument I wonder is if you want to put the strategist with the Byzantine gepids, heralds, whichever they, if that makes sense, you might want to use the strategist to control them. That's just one thought I might have.
It is tempting, but I'm just wondering, if you did that, are you actually talking about flipping the heralds into the first command and the heavy cavalry bow into the second one? So then you get heralds and scutatoi, and then you get an actual tactical faffing around shooty bowie command.
That's the problem. Trying to move the heavy infantry and the heralds with the strategist is going to be that's going to get very difficult. I'd just be tempted to have a kind of a micro command, possibly, of Byzantine cavalry, just to, charge off and do what they will somewhere.
But I think I'd take that out of the strategist command. I'd use the strategist to create a micro command, because once the scutatoi have been dragged up into place, they kind of sit there and absorb things. Other things are kind of committed, and then you probably do end up at some point with a medium cavalry and a light cavalry spare and lots of strategist points to do something intriguing with them.
I think there's an argument here that you could use those scutatoi in the first command to just plod across the table and try and pin some enemy. If you get within one MU, 40 millimeters the enemy, you're pinning them.
And it's still a long time to beat them. Yeah.
To be a sacrifice, whilst your cavalry can get around the side, maybe. The great thing with this army, if you can get any of those Bucalari heavy cavalry impact bow elites round the rear of the enemy, when they charge in, they're going to kill things very quickly.
Yeah, they take it out completely, don't they? Yeah, just in one go.
Get them hitting stuff in the flank, they're going to do some quick kills.
This means war.
Right, so we're on to our list number 3. So, Richard, this is one of yours, and you've named Belisarius as well as one of your commanders, but this is one in the east, fighting the Sassanids, I imagine, because you've got Gassids, who the flatulent early Arabs, I guess.
Absolutely.
Or the Belcher dynasty or something like that. So you're at 22, no fortified camp, so it's all troops, and you've got a 10, a 4, and an 8, and you're going with strategist, ordinary, competent as well. Run us through it. Which one do you want to start with? The micro command seems to be
the overall, perhaps, and then go into the details. So it's 22, of which only 1 is a light infantry. So you've potentially got 21 that will stand to a greater or lesser extent in the line of battle. People won't expect a Byzantine army to want terrain. So the idea then of the Gassanids is you've got a 6-wide medium foot. So you would hope to either have a field or a plantation. And the other plus of this is if the opponent does have elephants, you've got a 6-wide medium foot group, including 2 javelin men and some shooting, which is going to make, I think, any elephant Death Star just think a little bit about it, particularly if there are 2 light cavalry javelin dancing around on the flank. The idea of the smaller command at 4, it's got quite a lot of strike, it's got a lot of shooting, it can ambush, it can flank march. So it's a Byzantine strategist's little toolkit of trouble for the opponent. And then what's a bit different about the main command is inspired really by some of our previous talks. I thought, what helps cavalry? Tim's told me 2 heavy spearmen helps cavalry. And guess what? You can have the heralds starting off as full strength heavy spearmen. So now I've got 4 heavy infantry with the 2 mediocre heavy swordsmen. I mean, ideally they would have been ordinary, but it is a small army anyway. But now you've got 4 heavy infantry plus 4 heavy cavalry, and to their one of side or other of them, another 4 heavy cavalry. So the idea of this is to really use that maneuver to try and create flanks, use rough terrain to create a mini castle to threaten the enemy, while you bring up the shooters and pour it on and force the enemy ultimately, hopefully, to attack you at a disadvantage.
Yeah, because you've still got 8 heavy cavalry here, haven't you? And you've got the 4 of them with the elite double, whatever. The rest are just straight heavy cavalry, so that's quite decent. And then with
4 heavy infantry and 4 medium foot. Again, the javelinmen and the bowmen aren't that great, but if you've got 6 of them, most of the time your opponent isn't going to have 6. So there's a good chance you'll have an overlap, and with a competent general, you might get to attack and push something past his flank in the initial attack. I just thought it was a bit different. I wanted to try something a bit different to what I could do with the Mongol army, which is what the Byzantines at first look remind you of.
Dave, what's your thoughts? Are you thinking Sassanid Persia's going down if you're driving this one?
I've seen lots of people with Byzantine armies to try and get the points up and the numbers up use the early Arab ally. They quite often do it with a couple of camels in there as well. But I like it. I mean, I think you could even have them in it, 4 of them in an ambush. So you could have a javelinman and a swordsman in an ambush, and the first command could be put down. You just put down the 2 light cavalry and the 2 bowmen, something like that, and make people. I think the thing with this army is you're going to have to really make people think about what's coming up. Tim, yours is different. Yours is pretty one-dimensional, straightforward, bang on in. There's lots of ways you can make people really think about this. If you put a lot in one ambush with that command, you could even, as Richard says, use command 2 completely in an ambush. You could end up with 12 troops in ambush or in flank marches and only 10 bases on the table. This is one way. This is the one way I think it, and that's a very, very much the historical way these armies fought. So I think that's interesting. I still think the spear and the scutati are a little bit delicate.
I guess one thing you could do actually, Richard, looking at this, you're with a strategist and competent, you could drop the Gassid down to ordinary, and you could include him in a light horse unit, which would give you another 6 points, which would make your scutati back into ordinary. You could probably even support. Can you support them?
Yeah,
you can have them as ordinary supported for that, and having a light cavalry javelin general in that command, where actually you're probably fighting with the 6 foot, or the 6, not 6 feet, 6 foot, 6 infantry, would not be as risky as it sounds. I think that was one of the things that Dave, you'd done with one of your allies for the Romans in that Ionian last time, and it just makes your light horse a little bit more punchy. And I think the general is allowed to be included in those light cavalry javelin.
He is. Just looking at
he is.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think the reason, I think it depends. I mean, I partly saw the heavy infantry as extending the line and tempting the enemy. You almost want the enemy to have something that he wants to attack, otherwise he won't come forward.
Right.
So that's part of what was in my I think the Ghassanids, none of them are that strong, and so you want
to be able to move them.
I want to be able to move them, and because they're going to win by hitting flanks, and so that I think what you've said is perfectly valid. I think it depends, kind of what if it's a 1 day or a 2 day tournament, really.
Yeah, true. Because actually, having a target with the spearmen, and you want to be fighting with the 2 spearmen, and those heavy swordsmen are sort of extras. That's the frustrating bit about this. They're sort of expensive extras, aren't they, at 6? But making them 8
I thought as
9 is tricky.
As we've said before, being swordsmen, they can go into rough. So if you ended up having to cover 2 bits of rough terrain on different flanks, they allow you to go in, and they're not a disaster. I mean, they're not great, but they'll hang on a while just because they've got 4 points, and most things hitting them, might be medium swordsman or medium spearman. Well, they're going to usually take time to grind you down.
Yeah, and actually, just thinking about other things, you could almost make that third command out of Byzantine troops as well, couldn't you? Because they can have
Well, it's funny you said
javelin and
that.
bowmen. Yeah.
I think we'll find that in the next one.
Oh right. Okay. Well, look. Let's go on to the next
Means
one.
war. This means war.
So as if by magic, we're on to the next list, which is again the textbook 21. Seems mandatory. No fortified camp. The strategist exists yet again to boost the initiative up to 4, and you're on 8, 4, and 9 with this one, Richard. So yeah, talk us through where this one would be, how different it is, how it all fits together.
So instead of going for the ally, this is definitely an anti-Sassanid list in my mind. So what I've done is I've taken 2 of the impetuous heavy cavalry and added them to that what was previously the Ghassanids. I've lost 1 medium swordsman, but the idea would be when facing elephants, the 2 Goths would dismount as impetuous armored medium swordsmen.
Yeah.
And so you would then have a 7 wide, so probably 6 with 1 in support, block of medium troops that would go elephant hunting with an impact bow heavy cavalry and the light cavalry javelin being a micro command, as we were discussing earlier, to try and drop round a wing, but with the extra oomph of having the heavy cavalry impact bow. An opponent, even if they like the look of the medium foot, is going to be thinking twice if he's got those 2 units hanging out on his open wing. Middle command very much as before, and the other wing similar to before, but hasn't quite got the heavy cavalry punch.
It's just a little bit thinner, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Or it's one of the things that I wonder if that's one of the things they're going to look at in the next version of the rules that's out soon, in that it's always never quite sat comfortably with me that dismounted cavalry become the best infantry imaginable in terms of impetuous armored impact elite or whatever they can be sometimes, but yeah, that opportunity to dismount them is a really important thing, but even then having a block of 3 of those cavalry, 2 heavy cavalry impetuous and the impact bow is still quite punchy in its own right.
Yes.
Clearly I sit here driving 5 of them and think 3 is wonderful to find an opponent. But no, that's quite an interesting way of using the strategist that almost gives you 3 or 4 different ways of using that command, whether you dismount or not, against elephants, rather than just the normal 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Dave, what are you thinking on this one?
I think the dismounting troops in this set of rules is a really good rule. I think it really helps. You didn't have that in FOG, and you can only do it in certain situations against elephants and things.
Well, no, I'm not disagreeing with the concept of dismounting. I think it's actually in the rules. I think dismounting probably happens a bit too often, but as a game balance mechanism to flatten out elephants that's justified. My only question was having them dismount as a troop type that essentially doesn't exist. Armored, impetuous, medium swordsman is possibly a little bit strong because but that's only a tiny detail. That's the kind of thing. But yeah, don't get me wrong on that. I think
in actual facts, I think you're right on that case, because historically Narses dismounted his Goths and his heralds in Italy, and he used them in the centre of the army as spearmen. So maybe there's something in that there as well. So this is another way of running the Byzantines when you've got elephants around, and also to use some cheap troops to bring the number of, get your army break up, get yourself over 21, is to use the javelin men. It's quite common to have almost a micro command of javelin men off to one side to get yourself 2 large, cheap, good quality cavalry commands. And I think that's a good way. And it's an interesting way of running cavalry armies, and I think it's very valid. I've seen people do it with Scythians. I've been sat there going, wow, that person's got 4 javelin men and a light horse, and it's there, and it's actually a really interesting command. That I think that's really good and really valid. And I think again, Core 2 is another one which can flank, march, or ambush. I seem to be going on a lot about ambushes with this army, but
Yeah,
there you go.
if that's what they did. Yeah. Okay, interesting stuff. So look, so that's actually how many we've done. 4 lists now, haven't we? And I think they're actually all surprisingly different. And for a list that when we were chatting on email about setting this up, I think I said there is so few troop types in this list. I'm now sat here scratching my head and wanting to go back and check the list, because we seem to manage to find all sorts of different stuff that I don't remember seeing in there, because your eye is so drawn to the cavalry and then that block of scutatoi, and then you just steered down a route. But looking towards the tail end of it, and even thinking of the Goths as potentially dismounts and get the Slav in there and all the rest of it, you can actually get to that 4, 5, 6 medium foot command to go into terrain, to give you that option. That then suddenly, I like the idea that if you've got a plan for terrain and you've got troops for terrain, which this army list does, that obsession with getting a strategist and creating a billiard table suddenly falls away a bit, and that kind of takes off the scales when you're looking at all of the other elements in the army. So that's almost the trigger. Can I get 6 or 7 wide of medium foot? And the answer is yes, which suddenly makes all the other dominoes about the orthodoxy of using the army start to topple over as well.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. You could definitely give up some command in this version and either go for the camp or go for another unit or 2.
Yeah, no, again, that boost up the scutatoi.
Yeah,
initiative of 3 would still be all right, because you don't need to win it with this, because you've got a plan for medium foot and some medium terrain anyway.
This means war.
Okay, that's all the lists covered then. And as we normally do, wrapping this up in the last few minutes, Byzantines, it's another one of those armies that everybody used to have the same figures from Essex, but now there's starting to be a few more different types coming around. Dave, I think you've collected it. Richard, I'm not sure if you have, but Dave, you must have dug through the different manufacturers to look at some of the options.
I love the Byzantines. I specialised them at university. I really liked the Khorasan Nicaphorian Byzantine figures. Did them a long time ago, and I really love them.
Do they work for this period? Because that's I'm old and they don't at all. Okay, never mind then.
They're completely. So with the Justinian Byzantine army, I've always been sitting there thinking, you can use Roman figures, you can mix it up. And I think recently War and Empire, Forged in Battle, have done a specific Justinian Byzantine range. And I painted them up, love them to bits. They're very, very accurate in my opinion. And they've got the mix of figures right, so you can create all the different troop types. So you've got a Bucalari figure who's distinct. I mean, they're very much based on the WRG book.
Yeah.
May or may not be accurate in actual fact. But you've got the troop types. You've got a heavy cavalry elite.
I think actually history was based on that. The original army was based on that book, wasn't it? That's how they equipped it. Belisarius was flicking through his WRG and going, right, we better make trousers for these guys.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, I mean, yeah, you said they've got the figures. So you've got that Bucalari, the guard, companion, comitatus, cavalry figure, and they're distinctive to your opponents. That's the most important thing, so you can see it. Then you've got a heavy cavalry bow with a spear as such, so you can actually see that he's the heavy cavalry. And then you've got an armoured,
how do the Essex troops stand up, against some of these modern ones? Because I've
got a number of units of the Essex sort of late Roman, early Byzantine. I like them. They're a little bit, staid and solid in their poses. But since I also have a lot of Essex late Romans, they all sort of mix in quite well. And, by changing out units, the same broad force covers from about 250 to 600 AD. You've obviously got to change out some bits and pieces for each one, but it's quite a useful pool. The old museum, sort of later Byzantine figures, I thought were super, but they were large, so they didn't mix with anything else. But they had a lot of dynamism in their poses. It's just that when you put them on the table, they look more like 20 mil figures.
Yeah, you need a whole army of them, really, or something like that.
Yeah, but they look brilliant. I thought they're lovely. The capes and everything, they really look the business.
Yeah, I've got some Strategy Tactica Italian ones. That I've got some fabulous Scutatoi. The cavalry are a little bit dumpy, sort of drifting a little bit more towards the Knights models end of where Essex used to be, but they're pretty much Essex size. But the infantry are really, really nice. Lots of different cloaks and things on the Scutato. It's a shame all these lists only ever have 2 or 3 of them, really. I think I've got far too many. And then, and maybe, these days you can, going back to where we started, there's an opportunity to mix in the Bucalarii as well, and from maybe some Sassanid types or all sorts of different pieces, and make that a bit more eclectic, and say it's Eastern Front or Western Front or Africa, perhaps.
This is one list where, I do wonder whether almost they have enough bowmen in the foot that they shouldn't be an option to have them as mixed units of heavy sword bow. Because they did use the bowmen a lot, and I'm always slightly disappointed, even if it was a more expensive option, that the support doesn't get any shooting.
Yeah.
And to me, there was looking across history, there's a lot of troops that weren't full on, Florentine purveyors shooters, but used their shooting far more than the support +1 gives them credit for.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's 2 different things there, really. There's, if you're writing these lists, you don't want them to be all the same, all the Byzantine ones. So making an arbitrary decision that at the end of this list they become mixed shooters just creates variety, even if there's a gradual blend over that time. And then again, I think the cost, that +1 for support and it not quite being worth it, has been talked about as kind of one of the very few things, we're talking half a point's worth or whatever, all the way through version 3. So I'd be very surprised if there isn't some sort of tweak to either how support works or how it's costed that comes up in version 4, just because there are so few points that everybody has kind of gone, and that's one of them. So it probably would be on a list, you'd imagine, of things to be fixed. And maybe if support gets a little bit better, it becomes an option for people to take, even if it doesn't quite go the full way of becoming mixed integrated units.
Yeah,
I think they've tried to give some of the flavour of the different periods of Byzantine. Some of them are mixed in one list and not mixed in the other, and they're trying to give some flavour on it. And I sympathise with that. I think with this list, this sword, the infantry were infantry with bowmen working with them, rather than completely mixed units. But that's another argument. Should the Romans be completely mixed units as well? But there's another argument in there, isn't there?
Yeah, well, I think there is, but I think that probably sounds like another argument for another podcast. And maybe if they're still working on, didn't I do that well? Thanks, Dave. We've done that twice now, haven't we? That was good. We're almost getting the hang of this after nearly a year. But I think with rumours that the new version and everything will be out possibly Easter time or a little bit after that.
Really?
Maybe it won't be too long until we're doing some new lists anyway. So fingers crossed on that. But with that one, we'll wrap this one up, and we will trawl through the book to try and find something else a little bit obscure to have a look at in another week's time. But Dave, Richard, thank you once again, and
Enjoyed that.
see you all in a week or so's time. Goodbye.
Cheers.